like to talk about the meaning of the word Yovel. Yovel, or Jubilee, as it's sometimes translated into English, is something that we're most familiar with as part of the set of laws regulating the agricultural cycles of the land of Israel in the Torah. So, of course, we have every 7 years the Shemitah, the resting of the land, or the sabbatical year, that happens, in which things happen like the cancellation of debts and the prohibition of farming the land for surplus agriculture. And then on a longer time scale, we have a period of 50 years where we have 7 times 7 years. So 7 sets of 7 years that add up to 49, and then an additional 50th year that's called the Yovel. And in that year, we have even grander things that take place. In particular, the notable thing is that you have land that has been sold by any member of a tribe that has land. So there will be the ancestral tribal lands of Yehuda or the ancestral tribal lands of Binyamin. So if someone from Binyamin sells the land to someone from Yehuda, because maybe he wasn't dead and needed to sell his land or whatever else, then that sale is good for a maximum of 50 years. And then in the Yovel, the land returns to its ancestral holdings. So you have this cancellation in the long term of sale of land that goes outside the tribe. So that's the famous Jubilee year, which people are familiar with as the meaning of the word Yovel. If you say, what does Yovel mean? And someone's somewhat familiar with what's in the Torah, they'll say Yovel refers to this 50th year after 7 cycles of Shemitah, of the sabbatical year. But really, there's still a question we can ask, what does the word Yovel mean? Like, what does it refer to in a more basic sense that merits that it should be used as the label for this 50th year? And that's especially something worth asking because there are other instances of the use of the word Yovel that don't have to do explicitly with something like the sabbatical year and seem to be about other things. In particular, at the giving of the giving of the Torah at Sinai, for example, we have Hashem saying to the people as they're preparing to receive the Torah at Sinai, "Lo tiga'abo yad ki sakol yisakel o yarol yara'eh im behema im ish lo yehyeh bimshoch hayovel hema ya'alu bahar." So he's talking about sort of putting Har Sinai, the mountain, off limits in order to give it this kind of sanctification. And there shall not a hand touch it, but he shall surely be stoned or shot through, whether it be beast or man, it shall not live. When the blast sounds, they shall come up to the mount. So the blast of sound is the Yovel here. And we have that again, actually much more clearly and explicitly even in Sefer Yehoshua, in the time when the people are circling around and getting ready to see the walls of Yericho fall down. It says, "V'haya bimshoch bekeren hayovel b'shema'achem et kol hashofar yariu chol ha'am teru'a gdola v'nafla chomat ha'ir tachteha ve'alu ha'am ish negdo." It shall come to pass that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the shofar, all the people will shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city shall fall down, and the people shall ascend up, everyone straight before him. So there are already a bunch of things there that we could compare back to the passage from Ma'amad Har Sinai, but the thing that is most basically common between them is the blast of the shofar, the blowing of this horn made from an animal horn, the shofar, which is explicitly mentioned in this verse that mentions Yovel as the blowing of this shofar in Sefer Yehoshua. And really also we have in Har Sinai, Kol HaShofar Hazak Meod, or Holech VeChazak Meod, right? We have these mentions of the voice of the shofar being loud and strong in the giving of the Torah at Sinai. And so it just blends together with, and also there's Bimshoch HaYovel. Yovel in a basic sense, refers to the shofar. And that makes sense also with respect to the Jubilee year, because, of course, in the Jubilee year, we use the shofar, we blow in the shofar, and it's meant to be part of the announcement of that year. And so there is a connection between the word Yovel to the 7 cycles of sabbatical years and what leads to the 50th year with the Jubilee. But the fundamental notion of Yovel seems to be more like one of the blowing of the shofar. And yes, we do this blowing of the shofar, this Yovel of the shofar in the Jubilee year, but we also do it at other times, and you see it narratively, and then it's referred to as Yovel as well. And so, that I think raises the question for us of why we need a special word for this, and what distinguishes it from other noises. What is distinctive about the Yovel sound? What does it stand for? Why is it associated with certain events? And so I think the first thing that we can do with that is fairly simple, and we can just try to do a little detective work about what the word means in the Torah. And the way to do that is just to go back to the first appearance of words that really are showing us what it means, which are these names in the genealogies of the early people who are descendants of Adam and Chava that are listed in the beginning in Sefer Bereshit. So in particular, there's Lamech, who was one of the descendants of Cain, and with his wives Ada and Zillah, he produces, or really, this is with Ada, I guess, he produces these 2 sons. ותלד Ada et Yaval, hu haya avi yoshev ohel umikneh. And Ada bore Yaval. He was the father of those who live in tents and have mikneh, like cattle, basically. V'shem Ehiu Yuval, hu haya avi kol tofes kinor ve'ogav. And his brother's name was Yuval. He was the father of all those who handle the harp and pipe. Right? So then we go on, we hear about the son of Zillah, who was Tuval-Kain, and he made, bronze instruments. So we're just kind of getting this miscellaneous list of people who are associated with the innovation of these things that are pretty central to the human condition. But it's not everything about what it's like to be a person. There's not like, and then also there's the guy who invented boats, unless you consider that to be Noah. Or then there's also this guy who was the first one to fly a kite, or et cetera, right? Like there's a lot of different things that people maybe did for the first time. And even if you list the things that are very important, cooking, I don't know, things that are very central to the human condition, they don't all make the list here. So, but here we have this focus on 2 things with Yaval and Yuval, these 2 different names that are basically the word Yovel, either written with or without a vav, and different vowelization, obviously, but they're basically signaling something about Yovel here. And one of them is about herding, right? Like that mikneh, so someone, he was a herder of livestock. And the other one is about music, right? It's about musical instruments in particular. So not a huge coincidence, right? That when we think about, well, what is a shofar? It's an instrument of sorts, a horn for making sounds. Maybe it's stretched to call it music, but it's a horn for using like a musical instrument to make a sound, to blow on like a trumpet. And it comes from a herd animal. It comes from, for example, a ram, a male sheep. And so these 2 themes combine with Yaval and Yuval, and they produce this synthesis of the idea of a musical instrument, or let's say a sound-making instrument that's made out of a piece of the herd animal, the horn of the herd animal. And that's what a shofar is. And so it makes sense that that's why the word Yovel would somehow be associated with the blowing of the shofar. And up until now, I'm not saying things that haven't been observed before by others. For example, Rabbi Moshe Shulman in Shiurim on Torah and Machon, I think, has made basically these same observations. So fine. Yovel is somehow, it is the blowing of the shofar, but then it still raises the question, why do we need another word for the blowing of the shofar? And there, I think what we have to recognize is that it must somehow come from the fact that with Yovel specifically, that word, it's calling your attention to the unique aspects of the blowing of the shofar, right? That you can make a sound on a trumpet, you can blow on a chatzotzra, there are different ways of blowing on something to make a sound if you have different kinds of instruments. What makes this one distinctive is that it's made of a herd animal. And that's what gives you the a terminology that is not just saying, oh, okay, you have a shofar, it's some instrument, whatever instrument that is, use that, but it's saying, use this instrument, which is a horn of a herd animal. And that's what you're going to be doing when you're, bimshoch hayovel, when it's, the sound of the yovel. So that's an interesting objective observation, but now that raises the question, well, what does that have to do with, for example, the Jubilee year? Like, why do we care about making a big sound with a piece of a herd animal in the 50th year? Why call that 50th year Yovel if fundamentally what it's about is a land exchange or setting slaves free or all the things that happen in that year, cancellation of debts, um, letting the land rest? Why not just say, okay, you blow the shofar when you get to that year, and this year is called the 50th year? Why does it need to be called the year of Yovel? What is the significance of that connection? Why draw attention to the blowing of the shofar, and not even just that, but also the sort of herd animal producing musical instruments aspect of that? So there, I think there's more of an opportunity maybe to make a novel point, which is that when you combine these two things together and then you look at the Jubilee year, it helps you a bit to understand something perhaps about the significance of the shofar itself, which is, because we sort of take for granted, oh, a shofar is supposed to be made from the curvy horn of a kosher herd animal. And that's a nice custom we have, and it makes an interesting sound. And so we use it, and that's what the Torah says, and leave it at that. And you can make all sorts of other reasons why you want the ram's horn, because of Akedat Yitzchak, etc., when you want it for certain purposes, like on Rosh Hashanah. But particularly the notion of what is the horn for, and combining that with thinking about kind of breaking it into pieces. Like there's the sound part, there's the rhythm part, there's the music part. Part of what it's doing is allowing you to sort of create a rhythm, so to speak, to create music, to create a sound that people can hear far away. And then there's the herd aspect, and you say, okay, so what's interesting is that music does have power over people in a way that is about herd behavior, right? If you want to get everyone dancing to some tune, then you make a loud, repetitive sound, and now there's a rhythm, and now they can dance, right? That you can use the repetition of some pattern in sound to produce coordination of the behavior of many people. And we think of that as just something we do for fun, but it also demonstrates just the power of mass communication, right? That you can send out a signal whose pattern can be incorporated into the behavior of many people at once. And so what the horn allows you to do to some degree is to get a whole bunch of people to jump up and join forces and act a certain way. And indeed, the shofar was meant to be used for that purpose. The shofar is kind of an alarm siren for war, as you see many other examples elsewhere in Tanakh. And to the degree that that's the case, you are seeing collective behavior, you're seeing herd behavior that's being activated by the blowing of the shofar. So the word yovel is focusing on the possibility of collective behavior at the level of a society and a group of people, and how you're able to produce changes in that collective behavior because you have the means of some signal that everyone hears. And obviously there's sort of a basic level to it, to some degree to which that's true, that has to do with just, oh, if you play a catchy beat, a whole bunch of people will jump up and start dancing. So it can be kind of involuntary that you start to exert influence over everyone just by being able to control what they're hearing and to produce some kind of pattern that everyone is exposed to at the same time. But obviously, it gets much more subtle than that when it starts to be that people are taught to respond to signals that they all hear, right? Like if you hear this sound, this Torah, then it means everyone go get your weapons because we're going to war. Or if you hear this sound, it means everyone stand and listen, be ready to receive marching orders from the king or what have you, right? That once there's a culture, once there's a halakha, once there's a sort of a legal protocol surrounding how you signal with a tool like this, it becomes much more powerful in coordinating collective behavior. And in present day, we think of the shofar mainly as being about Rosh Hashanah. And Rosh Hashanah, the collective behavior it's coordinating is very hard to see because everyone repenting at the same time isn't obviously visible. And in some sense, everyone's already doing things that they do together, even if there's no shofar. Like if Rosh Hashanah happens on Shabbat, then we don't blow the shofar, or at least, that has customarily been the case for a long time. That's a whole discussion in halakha, depending on where you are and when you are and things like that. But in any case, like it's imaginable to have Rosh Hashanah without shofar. And so a lot of the things that people are doing in a group, you don't think of it as being caused by the shofar. And then we don't really use the shofar for a lot else these days. And, B'ezrat Hashem, we will again. But the shofar, for example, announces the Jubilee year. And the Jubilee year is a time for tremendous coordination of collective behavior, right? It's taking the whole society and saying, okay, all of these land sales that happened in a discoordinated fashion through the functioning of a market over the course of half a century are all canceled at the same time, right? So individuals were transacting in ways that didn't see what everyone else was doing and didn't care what everyone else was doing. And land changed hands, and lots of different things could go one way or another way as the market continues to proceed and property ownership evolves. But then you have this kill switch where at the end of all of that, suddenly everyone is acting the same. Everyone is saying, all right, this land that I own goes back to the tribal holding. And that's going to have an enormous impact on society, right? It's going to affect acutely everyone who's owning land or everyone who's receiving land back that didn't have land because it got sold by their grandparents or whatever. But there's also, if you think about it now, it's gonna also be a kind of a tune to which the whole market will be dancing, right? It's going to be the case now that when someone sells land, they know they're selling it for at maximum, 49 to 50 years. And then it's going to go back to tribal holdings. And that will affect how people choose to use land, right? Because maybe they'll plant things on it that will or won't be things that they will be able to benefit from, depending on whether they expect that they're going to be owning it at some time in the future, right? There's actually a passage in the Gemara about planting carob and how supposedly, according to the Gemara, it takes 70 years for a carob tree to even produce fruit after you plant it. So Choni Magal sees a man planting a carob tree and says, why are you planting that? You're not even going to get to eat the fruit. And he says, oh, but my children, my grandchildren will taste the fruit, right? So if you're planting a carob tree in a piece of land that is not from your tribe, then you're kind of crazy, because if it's going to take 70 years for that to grow, you're not going to taste the fruit before it goes back to someone else. On the contrary, if you are holding onto land currently that is your tribal holding, then you can make choices about how to develop the land that look that far ahead, because even if the land gets sold, it will come back to you eventually, right? So everyone's economic behavior is going to be affected by in those ways and a lot of other ways that are even less subtle once you create this rhythm. So that what's interesting is how Yovel of the Jubilee year sense becomes this grand experiment in how a rhythm, a 50-year rhythm in the market is going to have all of this impact on the collective phenomenon of how people functioning in the market of land ownership and land use are going to make different choices about how to develop the land and what to do with it, when to sell it, when to buy it, etc., because of that tune to which they're dancing, so to speak, or that drum beat, that rhythm against which they're operating. And we could leave it there and say, so that does explain to us a bit. Why is this year called Yovel? Well, it's called Yovel because Torah is interested in human herd behavior and interested in producing results that are sometimes about not producing an acute and immediate outcome by getting this guy to do this and that guy to do that, but instead creating a framework within which the collective phenomenon will function a certain way in the long term. And it's sensible to understand, therefore, why this year, this Jubilee year, is connected with the idea not just of music or sound, but also of herd behavior. And it clarifies for us that the shofar really is a symbol that is interested in the fact that the sheep is a herd animal, and that there's a kind of a herded livestock aspect to what it is meant to remind us of or meant to represent in its use. And that also is partly an explanation for why the shofar is present at the giving of Sinai, right? Why is there when it says bimshoch hayovel, at the drawing of the Yovel, or the blast of the Yovel, what does that have to do with the giving of the Torah at Sinai? Well, the giving of the Torah at Sinai and Yovel, meaning the Jubilee year, are these instances where Hashem is saying basically, Li haaretz, the land is mine. And so this is the board on which the game is played. And now I'm going to give you this land because of the collective phenomenon that I want to happen in this land. That's going to be a whole society that has a Torah that it shares, and that leads to a lot of coordinated motion amongst the members of that society. And so HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not saying you are sheep in the sense of you are unthinking herd animals that will, not ask any questions and just sort of putter around looking for grass to eat. But in another sense, he is saying, look, I'm the shepherd and you're the sheep, and I'm herding you. But the way I'm going to herd you is with this intricate law that will actually propel you to discover new dignity and elevate the human condition, right? Through study and through deepening understanding over generations. So it's not saying people are sheep in a derogatory sense. That you can say for Paro, who clearly did at some level regard people as sheep in a derogatory sense, that he was meant to just sort of shear as he wished. And that they were meant to be as unthinking as sheep, right? Paro's name actually contains the word shepherd in it, ro'eh, rish, ayin hey. And we know that in Egypt, in Mitzrayim, that it was forbidden to eat with shepherds in the time of Yosef, and also that slaughtering sheep was some kind of abomination to the Egyptians in the time of Moshe. There are all these things regulating things to do with shepherds and sheep, and that's because Paro doesn't want people to think about how shepherds eat sheep, because he is justifying his existence to his people by saying, look, I'm your shepherd, you're the sheep, don't think. I'll make sure you get grass and you don't have to worry about anything else. And I'll just, clip you here and there and take what I need from the system. And that's the deal in the compact. But if you have people eating sheep who are shepherds in front of you, you might start to wonder, like, well, if Paro is saying that I'm a sheep, then is he going to eat me? And indeed, that's really what Paro is doing. He is a sort of carnivorous shepherd in the way he treats his people. And of course, the Hebrews, Kal v'chomer, how much more so. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we have that concept also that Hashem is a shepherd. David says, Adonai ro'i lo ehsar. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not lack. Very famous beginning of a chapter in Tehillim and in Psalms. But when we say that Hashem is our shepherd, we're not saying we're unthinking sheep. What we're saying is that we are not just individuals with relationship to him, but we are a nation that has a collective behavior that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is trying to guide and cultivate. And what Yovel and things like it, what the Jubilee year give us a chance to see, is some of how the Torah understands the challenges of guiding that collective behavior. Because clearly part of how Yovel is meant to function, by way of contrast to Mitzrayim, again, to Egypt, is that it's meant to, for example, anticipate that the progression of market forces over time can lead to collective behaviors that are very problematic if you let them go unchecked, right? It can be the case that you can just have in a small country with a finite number of people, a certain number of economic shocks and fluctuations and people buying low and selling high. And before you know it, you can have someone who owns most of the land because he's done very well in the market, so to speak. So does he become Pharaoh forever because he won the game of life and bought up all the land, right? He had some, good roles in monopoly, so to speak. Or even you could say, give him credit. He's very smart. He's shrewd, like Joseph. He gets it in a way other people don't. And what happens with Joseph is that because he gets it, Paro is able to buy all of Egypt, lock, stock, and barrel, and he owns everyone as slaves in perpetuity. And the Torah is vehemently against that as the long-term outcome in Eretz Yisrael, the idea that the eventual progression of market forces should lead to the consolidation of ownership to the point where basically there's a pharaoh, where you can either call it communism or you can call it the extreme of capitalism, and it doesn't matter because at the end there's one person who owns everyone and everyone else is their slaves. That end point, we don't say, okay, well, if the market decides that that's what is going to happen, then that's what must happen. The Torah says, no, let's put a guardrail on the long-term progression of the purchase and sale of land. And then there's a lot of freedom, a lot of economic freedom that people are left to have within those bounds, but we are taking the collective phenomenon and trying to have it march to a different tune by putting in this rhythm of the Jubilee year, and that's going to keep it from collectively sliding in an unhealthy direction, which, given enough time, it could. And so I think that we not only can, in a just sort of informative or objective sense, realize the connection between the word Yovel and herds and rhythms, and understand that there's a kind of a rationale for why it has to do with the Jubilee year, but also that we see the value and purpose of the Jubilee year is about shepherding the people, right? And shepherding them away from becoming like an Egyptian pharaonic state in which the ownership of land and access to food all just gradually accumulates one way or another into the hands of a few people or into the hands of one person. And the last thing, maybe just to comment, is that I think it's worth observing the recurrence of the number 7 in connection with Yovel, because that is, we could treat as an arbitrary detail, but it's so consistent that even when we go to Jericho, when Joshua was about to make the walls of Jericho fall down, there it's even more intense. It's the 7 shofarot, and they walk around the city 7 times and 7 blasts. Like that, there's a repetition of 7 that is extreme in this moment, right? And it will come to pass that when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, and when you hear the sound of the shofar, I want the verse beforehand. ושבעה כהנים יישאו 7 שופרות היובלים לפני הארון, וביום השביעי tasobu et ha'ir sheva pe'amim ve'akohanim yitke'u b'shofarot. So look at the number of sevens. And 7 priests shall carry before the ark 7 shofarot of ram's horns, and the 7th day you shall go around the city 7 times, and the priest shall blow with the shofarot. So we already have the idea of 7 times 7 to get to 49, plus 1 makes 50 for the Jubilee year. And we can, in one sense, understand the connection to 7 there by going back to the narratives in Mitzrayim that we were referencing before. There were 7 years of famine after 7 years of plenty in Egypt. And Joseph used the predictions of those 7 years and 7 years to buy low and sell high and get the whole country to be slaves to Paro. And so the sabbatical year and the cycle of sabbatical years that leads to the Jubilee that prevents permanent land sales that take land away from the tribes, all of that is in some sense meant to prevent becoming like Mitzrayim in a way that is informed by the narrative that we have of how we saw that happen. And so 7 is just kind of a talisman that goes from one to the other. But we have to remember, of course, that 7 is also the number of days of creation at the beginning of Bereshit. And really, whenever Tanakh takes the number 7 and beats you over the head with it, it's also saying this is about what's natural. This is about the way the world works, the way it's created, how you expect it to work because of how it's created. And so in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, we could say that means that Yosef was recognizing a natural pattern in a sense. And, was it 7 years and 7 years, or is the point more so that it's about this is about something that is predictable because of the way the world works and the agricultural cycles of Egypt. And that's what a sort of hedge fund manager like Yosef can exploit and succeed at arbitraging in the market, right? So if you go over to the 7 times 7 years of the 49 plus 1 that leads to Yovel, then what's interesting in the Jubilee year is that we have to consider also the possibility that this is about nature as well, meaning this isn't just saying, perhaps, that, well, we want to, give land back to people who sold it, and because who knows, there could be all sorts of things that might happen at some point that need to be corrected. We don't want people to lose all the land for their tribe forever. Or is the Torah saying something even more so? It's saying it is natural and to be expected, given enough time, that there will be arbitrarily large accumulations of capital or land ownership, more explicitly, in the hands of a few people as the result of the way markets work, right? That it's not just a possibility, but it's an inevitability that will happen. And that you need, therefore, to have this rhythm built into the laws of the Torah that counteracts that inevitability and keeps the nation's long-term course aimed at one that makes sure that the land of Israel belongs to the people of Israel, so that all of them can remember it really belongs to Hashem, and that Hashem's name will never be lost from the story, because each individual will know that he can sell his land, and that it's always HaKadosh Baruch Hu and his law that he gave to us at Sinai that will bring the land back to the tribes in the end. As Hashem says, Li ha'aretz, the land is mine, and it doesn't belong to Am Yisrael unless we keep his Torah, including the laws of Yovel, which Bezrat Hashem we will keep one day again properly. It doesn't belong to Am Yisrael unless we're keeping the Torah and therefore meriting the gift that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us. That's not just a reward, but is a tool for serving him according to his Torah in the land that ultimately is his to give.